The day I moved into my new apartment should have been one of the happiest of my life. For months I had dreamed about this moment, finally escaping the cramped chaos of my old place, finally stepping into a chapter that was mine alone. The sun was high, the air warm, and my car was stuffed with boxes carrying all that I owned. Freedom was packed in those boxes, and I carried it up the stairs one load at a time, heart pounding with anticipation. The building itself looked ordinary enough from the outside. Brick walls faded by time, narrow balconies with rust-stained railings, and windows that caught the morning light in dull reflections. But as I stood before the front door of my apartment for the very first time, I noticed something strange. The hallway leading to it was quieter than it should have been. No muffled sounds of televisions behind doors, no children running, no footsteps echoing through the corridor, just silence. I brushed the unease aside as I unlocked the door. The apartment smelled faintly of cleaning products, but beneath it lingered another odor, something damp, almost earthy, like rain-soaked stone. The air inside felt still, as though no one had opened a window in years. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light spilling through the blinds, catching the golden glow of the afternoon. I wandered from room to room, noting the details. Walls painted a dull beige, corners where the paint bubbled and peeled, and light bulbs that flickered when I switched them on. The kitchen tiles were cracked, and the bathroom mirror bore faint streaks no scrubbing could erase. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For that moment, that was all that mattered. Each trip down to the car and back up the stairs left me more exhausted, but also more determined to make the place feel like home. I stacked books on shelves, placed photos on the nightstand, spread blankets across the bed. Still, the silence of the apartment pressed down on me, as if the walls were listening. I told myself it was just the nerves of moving, just the fatigue of carrying box after box. But in the pit of my stomach, I felt something else. Something about this apartment was wrong, and though I didn't know it then, moving day would be the last moment I ever felt safe there. As the hours of moving faded and the sun dipped lower in the sky, I finally had a chance to pause and take in the apartment properly. At first glance, it was nothing extraordinary, just four walls and a roof, another average rental space in a city full of them. But the longer I looked, the more I noticed details that unsettled me. The paint, for example. Beige walls that should have looked neutral and clean instead carried faint discolorations, as if water had seeped through them years ago, leaving behind ghostly stains in the shape of fingers clawing upward. Near the ceiling, in the corners of the rooms, the paint peeled in delicate curls, like dry skin flaking away. The smell lingered too. When I first walked in, I thought it was just leftover cleaning solution. But as the hours passed, the sharper notes faded, leaving behind something damp and sour. It reminded me of old basements, the kind where mildew clung to the walls no matter how much bleach you used. At moments, I swore the odor grew stronger near the hallway closet, though I hadn't opened it yet. The lights were no comfort either. The bulbs flickered inconsistently, sometimes humming faintly as though straining to stay alive. In the kitchen, one light swayed slightly, though no breeze stirred the air. Shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should have, pooling in corners where the illumination didn't quite reach. I told myself I was just exhausted, that these were ordinary quirks of an old apartment. But there was something else, something I couldn't explain. A heaviness hung in the air, a subtle vibration I could almost feel on my skin. It was the kind of sensation you get when you know someone is standing behind you, watching. Yet, whenever I turned, there was nothing there. I caught myself staring down the hallway more than once. At the far end was the bedroom door, slightly ajar, as though inviting me in. The crack of darkness beyond it seemed thicker than the shadows elsewhere. I hesitated each time before walking toward it, my chest tightening for reasons I couldn't name. It was a strange thing how a place meant to be my safe haven could make me feel so small, so out of place. And though I hadn't admitted it out loud, deep inside I felt certain. This apartment wasn't empty. I first met the landlord on the day I signed the lease. He was an older man, somewhere in his late 50s, with thinning grey hair slicked back too neatly and a smile that seemed a little too wide, a little too practiced. At first, I thought he was just another tired man in a cheap suit, eager to fill a vacancy and collect rent. But as I stood there with the keys in my hand, something about the way his eyes darted toward the apartment door made me uneasy. He walked me through the rooms with the enthusiasm of a salesman, pointing out details I would never have cared about. Good lighting in the kitchen, plenty of closet space, neighbors are quiet. His words flowed easily, but his gaze rarely lingered on the walls or corners. It was as if he didn't want to look too closely, as though he feared what he might see if he did. When we reached the hallway, he stopped abruptly. For the first time, his constant smile faltered. He cleared his throat, fingers tightening around the keyring he carried. Then, almost too casually, he said, "If you hear things at night, don't worry about it. This place has old pipes, old walls. They creak, they groan. Nothing unusual." The way he said it made my stomach knot. He hadn't given me a warning about late rent fees or the noise policy he warned me about sounds at night. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "I've lived in worse," I said, but my words fell flat. He only smiled again, tighter this time, the corners of his mouth straining against his skin. "You'll get used to it," he replied. "Everyone does." Or he stopped himself, the sentence hanging in the air like a noose. Then, forcing the smile back onto his face, he handed me the last set of papers to sign. I wanted to ask him what he meant, what had he almost said, but something in his eyes warned me not to. It was the look of a man who knew something he didn't want to put into words. As he left, his footsteps echoing down the hall, I caught a final glimpse of his face. That smile, hollow, strained, desperate to appear normal. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't the smile of a landlord welcoming a new tenant. It was the smile of someone relieved the apartment was no longer his problem after the landlord left. Silence swallowed the apartment once more. I stood there, clutching the keys in my hand, telling myself this was the start of something good, my independence, my freedom, a place where I could finally breathe without anyone else's rules. So I pushed the unease aside and tried to focus on the practical, unpacking. The process was oddly comforting at first. I stacked books on the shelves, placed picture frames along the nightstand, and laid out familiar blankets on the bed, little pieces of my old life scattered into the new. I lit a cheap candle in the living room, hoping the scent of vanilla would chase away the damp odor clinging to the walls. For a moment, I convinced myself it worked. But no matter how much I arranged, how many belongings I spread across the rooms, the apartment never felt warmer. The walls seemed to resist decoration, as though they were unwilling to accept me. My photos, bright and cheerful, looked strangely out of place against the dull beige paint. The shelves sagged as though groaning under the weight of my books. Even the candlelight seemed to sputter, flickering shadows that stretched unnaturally long across the floor. I tried music next, something upbeat, loud enough to drown out my thoughts. The sound filled the air, bouncing off the walls, but it only made the silence underneath more noticeable. It was like the apartment itself was listening, waiting for the moment the music stopped. When I sat down to eat my first meal, their simple sandwich, hastily made, the chair beneath me creaked loudly, echoing through the empty space. I laughed at myself, brushing it off, but the sound didn't fade as quickly as it should have. It seemed to linger, like the walls absorbed it and whispered it back. Later that evening, as I walked from room to room, checking each corner like I always did in new places, I felt the cold spot for the first time. It was in the bedroom, near the far corner by the window. The air was several degrees colder there, biting against my skin. I stood for a moment, puzzled, rubbing my arms. No draft, no crack in the glass, no vent nearby, just a chill that felt unnatural. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing old. Buildings had quirks. Still, when I climbed into bed that night, the memory of that cold corner pressed against the back of my mind. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, staring into the dark, listening to the silence. The apartment was mine now, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me. It felt like I was intruding when night finally settled over the city. The apartment took on a different character entirely. The golden streaks of sunset faded, leaving the rooms cloaked in shadows that seemed thicker than ordinary darkness. The street outside grew quiet, and for the first time since moving in, I was truly alone with the place. I brushed my teeth in the small bathroom, the mirror fogging faintly even though the water wasn't warm. My reflection looked paler than usual, eyes tired from the long day. As I turned off the light, the faint sound of water dripping echoed behind me. Though I'd shut the faucet tightly, I forced myself not to linger. In the bedroom, I crawled into bed, pulling the blanket close, listening to the unfamiliar silence. In my old apartment, I'd grown used to the chaos of life bleeding through thin walls, neighbors arguing, cars rushing past, someone's TV blaring too loud. But here, the silence pressed in like a weight. Not peaceful silence, something heavier, unnatural. Every sound the apartment made seemed amplified. The wooden floor groaned as though someone were walking slowly across it, even though I hadn't moved. Pipes moaned faintly in the walls, carrying a sound almost like a sigh. The refrigerator clicked on with a hum that felt too loud in the stillness. And yet, beneath those noises, there was something else, something subtle. The quiet scrape of wood, the faintest rustle, like fabric brushing against a wall. Each time I sat up, holding my breath, it stopped. When I lay down again, it returned. I told myself it was just nerves. First nights anywhere were always unsettling. The bed was strange, the air too cold, the shadows unfamiliar. But no matter how I tried to rationalize, the feeling only grew stronger. I was not alone. At one point, I glanced toward the hallway. The door was ajar, and beyond it stretched nothing but blackness. Yet I could have sworn I saw movement, just the faintest flicker, like someone stepping out of sight the moment I looked. My chest tightened, my throat dry, and for several long minutes, I couldn't tear my eyes away. Finally, exhaustion won. My eyelids grew heavy, though sleep was fractured and shallow. In those restless moments between waking and dreaming, I felt it most, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me, following me into slumber. By the time morning light seeped through the blinds, I was still curled tight beneath the blankets, every muscle sore from tension. It had been my first night alone in the apartment, and already, I wished I wasn't. The second morning in the apartment, sunlight spilled across the bedroom floor, warming the wooden boards and pushing back the gloom that had unsettled me through the night. For a short while, I almost convinced myself the unease was nothing more than exhaustion. I moved through the rooms, unpacking a few more boxes, forcing music through my phone's speaker to make the silence less oppressive. But the illusion of normalcy never lasted long. By mid-afternoon, I noticed the cold again. It began as a subtle chill brushing against my arm while I sat on the edge of the bed. At first, I assumed it was a draft from the window. But when I pressed my hand against the glass, the surface was warm from the sun. I ran my palm along the frame, searching for gaps or cracks, but found none. The chill didn't come from the window at all, it radiated from the far corner of the room. I stepped closer, frowning as goosebumps prickled my skin. The rest of the room felt normal, but in that one patch of floor the temperature seemed to drop drastically. My breath fogged faintly in the air, visible for a fleeting second before vanishing. I pulled back instinctively, heart beating faster. Curiosity pushed me forward again. I placed my hand flat against the wall in that corner, ice cold, not just cool to the touch, but the kind of bone-deep cold you feel when you grip frozen metal. The sensation lingered in my palm long after I pulled away, leaving my skin numb. I checked for logical explanations. Faulty insulation, a hidden vent, maybe pipes behind the wall. But the layout of the building didn't make sense for any of that. And even if it had, no vent or draft should make the air so frigid in such a focused spot. While the rest of the room remained warm, the strangest part was how the cold seemed to react to me. The longer I stood in that corner, the sharper the chill became, as though it fed on my presence. My chest tightened, breath quickening. I stumbled back toward the bed, heart hammering, unable to shake the impression that the cold wasn't just a temperature shift, it was a presence that night. The chill didn't go away, even under thick blankets. Even with the heater on, the corner of the room exhaled its icy breath. Every time I rolled over, my eyes drifted to it, waiting for something, anything to emerge from the darkness that pooled there. I didn't sleep well, and by morning, I realized something that turned my stomach. The cold spot wasn't a part of the apartment, it was something inside it. By the third night, exhaustion had hollowed me out. The silence of the apartment, the restless dreams, and that unbearable cold corner had drained whatever excitement I had left about moving here. I spent the evening scrolling endlessly through my phone. The glow of the screen my only companion, too uneasy to let myself drift into sleep. The clock ticked steadily toward midnight, and though I didn't want to admit it, I was waiting for something to happen. When the old clock app on my phone switched from 11:59 to 12 o'clock, the sound came. 3 knocks. They weren't the accidental pops of old pipes or the settling of wooden beams. These were deliberate, heavy, measured. The sound resonated through the walls, each knock deep enough to vibrate faintly in my chest. Boom, boom, boom. I sat upright in bed instantly, pulse hammering in my ears. The sound had come from the direction of the hallway. My first thought was someone outside, maybe a neighbor. but the walls here were thick, and I hadn't heard a single person since moving in. This was different. This was close. Too close. I held my breath, straining to listen. For several long seconds, there was only silence. I forced myself to lie back down, whispering reassurances into the dark. Old buildings make noises. You're imagining things. You're tired. But then it came again. Boom, boom, boom. This time louder, closer. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, moving as quietly as I could, as if whatever was making the noise could hear me. My bare feet pressed against the cold floorboards, and I crept to the bedroom door. I hesitated, my hand trembling on the knob, then cracked it open just enough to peek into the hallway. It was empty. The hallway stretched out in dim light. Shadows pooled in the corners, but there was no one there. Yet the knocks had echoed from that very direction. My skin crawled as I realized the sound wasn't just near the hallway, it was inside the apartment. I closed the door quickly, sliding back into bed like a frightened child. My heart raced, and I pulled the blanket to my chin, staring at the ceiling as I waited. Minutes crawled by. Then the knocks came again, slower this time, almost mocking. Boom, boom. I bit my lip until I tasted copper, fighting the urge to scream. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just lay there, staring into the dark, waiting for the next sound. By morning, when the light finally returned, the apartment was silent again, but I knew it wasn't empty. Something had started knocking, and it was knocking for me. The day after the knocking, I convinced myself that fatigue and nerves had played tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. The sound had been too precise, too deliberate. Still, I tried to bury myself in normal routines, making coffee, unpacking, pretending the apartment was just for walls and nothing more sinister. Yet the silence never felt like silence anymore. It felt like waiting. That night, as I sat in bed scrolling through my phone to distract myself, I noticed it for the first time, a flicker across the wall. At first I thought it was just the headlights of a passing car, but the street outside was quiet and empty. The shape that moved across the wall wasn't the soft glow of light, it was darker than the room itself. A shadow. I froze. My eyes locked on the wall opposite my bed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, out of the corner of my vision, I saw it again. A blur, a shift, a shadow sliding across the hallway wall, as though someone had walked past the bedroom door. My stomach twisted slowly. I turned my head toward the door. The hallway beyond was empty. The door itself hadn't moved. No draft stirred the air, and yet the shadow had been there, clear, deliberate, impossible. I told myself it was just my imagination, but my body betrayed me. Goosebumps prickled across my skin, my heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the dark stretch of hallway. I waited, terrified, as seconds dragged into minutes. Then it happened again. This time the shadow was unmistakable, a tall, thin shape gliding smoothly across the wall, as though someone invisible had walked past with perfect silence. It didn't move like a trick of light. It moved like a person. I jumped to my feet, flicking on the bedroom lamp, desperate for reassurance. The light spilled across the room, chasing away the deep shadows. The hallway lay still and empty once more, but in the pit of my stomach, I felt a truth I couldn't shake. I hadn't imagined it. Sleep became impossible after that. Every flicker of shadow became a potential figure. Every corner of the apartment a stage for movement I couldn't see directly. Sometimes I thought I glimpsed faces in the periphery of my vision, only for them to vanish when I turned my head. Other times, I saw the same tall shape lingering in the hallway, watching me, waiting. By the time the dawn crept in, I was exhausted, nerves raw, eyes bloodshot, from staring too long into the dark. I told myself again and again that it was just shadows, just tricks of the mind, but I couldn't ignore the fact that the shadows always moved with purpose. And they always moved toward me. After several sleepless nights filled with knocks, whispers, and shadows that didn't belong, I finally decided to leave the apartment during the day just to escape its suffocating silence. The sunlight outside felt foreign, almost too bright, as though I had been living underground. I lingered in the courtyard longer than usual, sipping bitter coffee from a paper cup, and trying to convince myself that I was unraveling from stress, not because something inside those walls was real. It was there that I met one of my neighbors, a woman in her late 30s carrying groceries up the stairs. She smiled politely at first, the kind of neighborly acknowledgement I had longed for. But when I mentioned which apartment I had just moved into, her face changed. The smile slipped. Her eyes darted away, and she tightened her grip on the grocery bag until her knuckles whitened. "Oh," she said quietly, almost too soft to hear. That one, her tone made my skin prickle. I forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, apartment 3B, still trying to settle in. A little noisy at night." She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. For a long moment, I thought she wouldn't respond. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping. "You're not the first to say that. People don't usually stay there long." The words hung heavy between us. I asked what she meant, but she shook her head quickly, eyes flicking nervously toward the hallway windows as though afraid someone or something might be listening. "It's old," she muttered. "Old buildings creak, that's all." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I pressed again, my curiosity outweighing my fear. "What happened before? Did something happen in my apartment?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she gave me a look I couldn't quite read: pity, fear, resignation, and whispered, "Just don't open the storage room. And if you hear it calling, don't answer." Before I could question her further, she hurried up the stairs, bags rattling against her side, her steps quick and uneven. I stood frozen in the courtyard, her warning echoing in my ears. "Don't open the storage room. Don't answer." The rest of the day, I couldn't stop replaying her words. I had never mentioned the storage room to her. I hadn't even told her about the knocking, yet somehow, she knew. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. Whatever was haunting my apartment wasn't just my problem. It was part of the building, part of its history, and everyone else was too afraid to speak of it. That night, after my encounter with the neighbor, I tried to shake off her words. I told myself she was exaggerating, or maybe just superstitious. Yet when I finally lay down in bed, her warning echoed louder than the silence around me. "Don't open the storage room. And if you hear it calling, don't answer." Sleep did not come. My body was heavy with exhaustion, but my mind was restless, circling the same questions over and over. Eventually, somewhere between wakefulness and surrender, I slipped into dreams, and that was when things grew worse. The dream began innocently enough. I was standing in the apartment, the rooms brighter than usual, every corner illuminated as though by sunlight. But no matter how bright it looked, the air felt heavy, dense, like walking underwater. My feet dragged across the floor as if something resisted my every step. Then I noticed the bedroom door, wide open. Beyond it, the hallway stretched impossibly long, much longer than it had ever been in waking life. At the very end stood the storage room door, the one I had avoided since moving in. Its chain rattled faintly, though no wind stirred the air. I wanted to turn away, to run, but my body betrayed me. I walked forward, one step at a time, each echo booming unnaturally loud against the walls. The closer I came, the darker the hallway grew, until only the door at the end was visible, glowing faintly with a sickly light. And then I saw it. Something was standing just outside the storage room, tall, thin. Its body was little more than a shadow, but its face was horribly clear. Hollow eyes, a mouth stretched wide into a grin that was too large, too sharp. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, as though it were studying me with amusement. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat felt sealed, my lungs heavy with ice. The figure lifted one hand long, pale fingers curling in a gesture I understood instantly. It was beckoning me closer. The dream snapped apart then, shattering like glass. I woke in my bed, gasping, drenched in sweat. My blankets were twisted tightly around me as though I had been struggling in my sleep. For a moment, I was certain it had only been a nightmare, and then I noticed something. The chain on the storage room door visible through the crack of my bedroom door was swaying, faintly rattling, exactly as it had in the dream. I told myself it was coincidence. It had to be, but deep down, I knew the truth. The dreams weren't dreams. They were invitations. After the dream, the apartment no longer felt like a place I lived in. It felt like a place I was trapped in. Every creak, every flicker of light, every faint chill gnawed at me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. But it wasn't until objects began to move that I understood just how real it was. It started small. I left a glass of water on the kitchen counter before heading to the bedroom, only to return later and find it an inch closer to the edge. I brushed it off as forgetfulness, telling myself I must have set it there without noticing. The same happened with my keys. I always dropped them into the bowl near the door. Yet twice I found them lying in the middle of the floor. At first I blamed myself. Stress, fatigue, distraction. But then came the night I knew for certain. I was sitting in the living room, trying to lose myself in a movie, when I heard a faint scrape from the kitchen. My body went cold, but I forced myself to check. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. Then, right before my eyes, the cabinet door slowly swung open with a creak. My stomach dropped. I whispered aloud, "No, it's just loose hinges." But even as I said it, another cabinet door opened. Then another. Within seconds, every cabinet in the kitchen had burst open, slamming against the walls in a violent chorus. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug, as the glass I had left on the counter slid forward by itself and shattered on the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence that followed. I stood frozen, chest heaving, the reality of what had just happened pressing down like a weight I couldn't escape. The worst part wasn't the noise, though it was the feeling. A heavy presence filled the room, thick and suffocating, as though someone stood inches away, watching, waiting for me to acknowledge them. My skin prickled with static, the air cold against my sweat-damp skin. I whispered, barely able to breathe, "Who's there?" No answer came, but the overhead light flickered violently, buzzing until the bulb blew with a sharp pop, plunging me into near-darkness. The silence after was unbearable. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat awake in bed, the shattered glass still scattered across the kitchen floor, my heart beating too fast to rest. For the first time, I fully understood this was no coincidence, no stress-induced trick of the mind. Something else lived in my apartment, and it didn't want me there by now. I was used to the sound, squeaks, knocks, the occasional slam of a cabinet, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I finally heard it. The voice. It was just after 3 in the morning. The hour when the apartment seemed most alive. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, unable to sleep after another night of shifting shadows and unexplained chills. The blanket was pulled up to my chin, though it did little to stop the cold seeping in from the corner of the bedroom. The apartment was silent, oppressively so, when suddenly I heard it, the faintest sound of breathing. At first, I thought it was my own, shallow and panicked, but then I realized it was coming from somewhere else. Slow, raspy breaths, dragging in and out, as though someone stood just beyond the bedroom door. I froze, straining to hear, my chest aching as I tried to keep still. The breathing grew louder, closer. I could almost feel it against my skin, like someone leaning inches from my ear. And then, in a voice so faint I thought I might be imagining it, came the words, "Get out." My blood turned to ice. I bolted upright, eyes darting toward the door, dreading to see someone standing there. But the doorway was empty, filled only with darkness. My heart hammered, my throat dry, but the voice came again, this time firmer, angrier. "Get out." I clutched the blanket tighter, my breath quick and shallow. My mind raced with explanations, neighbors, thin walls, some trick of acoustics, but I knew better. The voice hadn't come from outside the apartment, it had come from inside the room. Suddenly, the lamp on the nightstand flickered. Once, twice, then it went out completely, plunging me into suffocating darkness. The breathing grew ragged, filling every corner of the room, surrounding me. I covered my ears, desperate to shut it out, but the voice pressed through, louder now, echoing inside my head. "Get out," I screamed, fumbling for my phone. Its screen blazing to life with harsh light, and just like that, the breathing stopped. The room stilled. The lamp flickered back on, casting the corner in its usual pale glow. But the damage was done. I sat there shaking, phone clutched tight, waiting for the voice to return. It didn't. The rest of the night passed in silence, yet I couldn't escape the truth. The knocking, the shadows, the moving objects, none of it had been random. Something in the apartment was aware of me, and now it had spoken. The morning after hearing the voice, I stumbled through the apartment in a haze, my nerves raw, my mind barely tethered to reality. I told myself I should leave, that no sane person would stay another night, but something stronger than fear held me there, a need to understand. That was when I finally noticed the door I had been avoiding. It was at the far end of the hallway, almost hidden in shadow. I had walked past it dozens of times while unpacking, dismissing it as just another closet, another empty storage space. But now, in the sharp light of day, I saw the truth. This was no ordinary door. The frame was older than the rest of the apartment, the wood darker, heavier, as though it had been part of the building long before the renovations. A thick chain coiled around the handle, padlocked tightly, keeping it sealed shut. Deep scratches ran along the doorframe, jagged and frantic, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way out. My chest tightened. The neighbor's words returned with chilling clarity. "Don't open the storage room, and if you hear it calling, don't answer." I crouched to study the bottom of the door. The wood there was splintered, gouged with long marks, as though fingernails had been dragged across it. Dust lay thick along the hallway floor, but near the door it was disturbed, scattered, as if someone had been pacing back and forth in front of it. I pressed my palm against the surface, half expecting to feel the icy chill I'd grown used to in the bedroom corner. To my horror, the wood was cold freezing, cold burning into my skin, until I pulled away with a hiss. The air around the door was heavier, denser, as if it belonged to a different place altogether. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just an old, locked storage space. But questions gnawed at me. Why was it chained from the outside? Why hadn't the landlord mentioned it when he walked me through the apartment? And what, if anything, was behind it? That night, I couldn't stop staring down the hallway. The door loomed in the darkness, its outline sharp, the chain glinting faintly in the dim light. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the padlock rattling, the chain sliding loose. At some point past midnight, I swore I heard it, a faint metallic clink, followed by the slow creak of shifting wood. My breath caught in my throat, my body rigid under the covers. I forced myself not to look, not to move, but in the silence that followed, I could have sworn I heard something else, a voice, whispering, from behind the locked door. The longer I stared at that chained door, the more it pressed against my thoughts. I couldn't shake it. It was the only place in the apartment I hadn't explored, the only mystery left unsolved, and yet every instinct screamed at me to stay away. My neighbor's words echoed in my head, and the memory of those scratches on the wood made my skin crawl. I needed to hear a familiar voice, someone who could reassure me, ground me, convince me that I was just letting fear consume me. So I picked up the phone and called my grandmother. She had always been a steady presence in my life, the one who, even in the face of hardship, always sounded calm, always carried answers. When she picked up, her voice was warm at first, asking about the new apartment, about how I was settling in. I tried to keep my tone light, brushing off the sleepless nights and strange noises as if they were nothing. But as I mentioned the storage room, the locked door with its heavy chain, her voice changed. The silence on the line stretched, heavy and unnatural, before she finally spoke. "You shouldn't have moved there," she whispered. Her words were sharp, urgent, cutting through the static of the call. "That place, it remembers." A chill raced down my spine. "What do you mean, remembers?" I asked, my voice cracking despite myself. "You need to leave," she continued, ignoring my question. "Don't touch that door. Don't even go near it. Promise me." Her tone was unlike anything I'd heard from her before, tight with fear, almost breaking. It wasn't the voice of a woman worried about her grandchild being homesick. It was the voice of someone who knew. I pressed her for answers. "Grandma, please, just tell me what's going on. Did something happen there?" But she only repeated herself, her voice trembling. "I told your father never to rent in that building. It doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. Please, promise me you won't open that door." The line crackled then, a burst of static so sharp it made me wince. And beneath the noise, I thought I heard something else, faint, guttural, like another voice bleeding through. I pulled the phone away from my ear, heart hammering. When the static cleared, Grandma's voice was back, urgent and pleading. "Get out while you still can." Before I could answer, the call dropped. The line went dead. I sat there in silence, phone still pressed to my ear, my hand trembling. The air in the apartment felt heavier than ever, pressing against my chest, cold and suffocating. And for the first time since moving in, I truly believed what I already knew deep down. I wasn't just living in a haunted apartment, I was living inside someone else's memory. After the call with my grandmother, I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest. Her words clung to me like a second skin. "It remembers, don't touch that door. Get out while you still can." But leaving didn't feel like an option anymore. Something in the apartment had its claws in me, and the more I thought about running, the more I felt it watching, waiting, daring me to try. The following evening, I found myself pacing the apartment, restless and anxious. The air felt charged, electric, as though a storm was gathering outside heaven. Though the sky beyond the windows was perfectly clear, I went into the bathroom to splash cold water on my face, hoping to break free of the tension strangling me. The mirror above the sink was old. its edges spotted with tarnish that no amount of scrubbing could erase. As I leaned forward, dripping water from my hands, I caught movement behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but when I looked up, my reflection wasn't alone. Standing in the dim hallway behind me was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, its shoulders hunched in a way that made its frame look broken, unnatural. Its skin was pale, almost translucent like wax, left too long in the sun. The face was worse. Hollow eyes, empty sockets glowing faintly, and a grin carved too wide, splitting the corners of its mouth unnaturally. My heart stopped. I spun around instantly. My breath caught in my throat. The hallway was empty. Nothing there. The silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating, but the figure was gone. I whipped my head back to the mirror. My reflection stared back, pale and shaken, alone. The figure was no longer there, but the faintest trace of condensation streaked across the glass, as though someone had stood close to it, breathing heavily on the surface. The worst part was the smell. A sharp, metallic Thames filled the air like rust, or blood. It lingered long after the vision had vanished, clinging to the back of my throat, until I gagged. I stumbled back from the sink, hands trembling, refusing to look into the mirror again. My pulse thundered in my ears, and all I could think was that Grandma had been right. The apartment remembered, and it wanted me to see it. That night, I covered the mirror with a towel, unable to bear the thought of catching another glimpse of whatever had appeared there. But even with the mirror hidden, I felt it, the weight of unseen eyes lingering behind me, patient, waiting for the next moment I dared to look. And deep inside, I knew the reflection had only been the beginning. I had convinced myself that covering the mirror would grant me peace, that blocking its surface would stop the visions from creeping into my nights. But when midnight came, I learned how naive that hope had been. The apartment had grown tired of whispers and shadows. Now, it wanted to make itself known. It began with the familiar knocking, 3 heavy thuds, resonating through the walls, just as they had before. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, dot. I lay in bed, rigid, staring at the ceiling, every muscle locked in terror. But unlike the other nights, the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more violent, echoing from every direction at once wall's floor, sealing as though the entire apartment was surrounded. Boom, boom, boom. I clutched the blanket to my chest, heart hammering, when the lights began to flicker. The lamp on my nightstand buzzed angrily, casting jerky shadows that seemed to writhe across the walls. The overhead light in the hallway sputtered, flashing in rapid bursts until the corridor appeared to strobe with every flicker. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging steps pacing the length of the hallway, forward and back, forward and back. Each step was heavy, wet, as if something soaked in water was moving just beyond my door. My mouth went dry, my body screamed to run, but fear routed me to the mattress. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, silence stretched, suffocating. Then the pounding began. Not knocking, pounding, fists, claws, something slamming against the walls with animal fury. The entire apartment shook under the force, picture frames rattling violently, dishes shattering in the kitchen. The chain on the storage room door clanged against the wood, straining with each impact. I screamed, covering my ears, tears stinging my eyes. But even through the noise, I heard it. The voice. This time it wasn't faint. It was deafening, layered with rage, vibrating through the very walls. Let me out. The lights exploded in a burst of glass, plunging me into darkness. The pounding stopped instantly, replaced by silence so deep it roared in my ears. I sat frozen in bed, trembling violently, the smell of burnt wires and dust filling the air. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the only sound was my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. When I finally dared to open my eyes fully, I saw it, the faint outline of a figure in the darkness, standing in the corner of my bedroom where the cold never left. It didn't move. It only watched. And in that stillness, I understood. The apartment wasn't trying to scare me anymore. It was trying to break me. The night after the pounding, I barely held myself together. Every sound in the apartment was unbearable. Every shadow, a threat. I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare brought on by exhaustion. But when I stepped into the hallway the next morning, the truth stared me in the face. The chain on the storage room door was broken. It lay on the floor in a twisted heap of rusted metal. The padlock split clean down the middle, as though torn apart by impossible strength. The door itself stood slightly ajar, swaying gently though the air was still. I froze, unable to breathe. My first thought was an intruder. Someone had broken in during the chaos of the night. But the scratches on the wood told a different story. They weren't new, they had always been there, gouged deep and desperate. The broken chain didn't look cut. It looked ripped, pulled apart from the inside. The silence in the hallway pressed against my ears as I stepped closer, each footfall heavier than the last. I told myself not to touch it, not to look, but some part of me, morbid curiosity, or perhaps something darker, pulled me forward. With trembling fingers, I nudged the door open wider. That the room beyond wasn't what I expected. I thought I'd see shelves, boxes, maybe old furniture. Instead, the air inside was suffocatingly cold, the kind of chill that bites into bone. The walls were covered in black stains, spreading outward like mold but pulsating faintly, almost alive. The floor bore deep scratches, overlapping claw marks carved into the wood, and the smell, thick, metallic, choking, hit me like a wave of rot. At the far end of the room, the shadows seemed thicker, darker than natural. My eyes adjusted, and I swore I saw something move within them, something tall, shifting, watching. I stumbled back, heart pounding so violently I thought my chest would split. The door creaked louder, as though groaning in relief at being open. For a moment, I imagined slamming it shut again, trying to find another chain, another lock, but the thought was useless. You can't lock away something that doesn't want to be locked. That night, the apartment felt different. Not just haunted. Every corner seemed to breathe. Every flicker of shadow felt purposeful. The presence was no longer confined behind the chained door. It had stepped out, and I could feel it moving freely. I wasn't living with the haunting anymore. I was living inside it. The night the storage room opened, I refused to sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife I knew would be useless against whatever haunted me. My body trembled with exhaustion, but I couldn't close my eyes. I knew the moment I did, it would come closer. At around 3 a.m., the air shifted. The lights flickered, one after another, until only a single lamp remained glowing weakly. The apartment seemed to hold its breath. The silence was suffocating, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I heard the first step before I saw it, a slow, deliberate scrape of foot against wood, coming from the hallway. My chest tightened. My grip on the knife weakened as sweat slicked my palms. Then I saw it. The figure emerged from the darkness of the hallway with an unnatural grace. Its tall frame hunched, as though its bones were misaligned. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched thin across sharp joints. Each step it took echoed louder than it should have, like the floor itself recoiled from its touch. But it was the face that shattered me. Hollow eyes glowed faintly with a sickly white light, empty yet piercing, locking me in place. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide into a grin that split its cheeks, revealing rows of jagged teeth, too long, too many, glistening in the dim light. The grin never moved, yet I felt the weight of its amusement pressing against me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My body betrayed me, frozen as though the air itself pinned me down. The knife slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. It stopped only a few feet away, tilting its head slowly to one side, studying me with inhuman patience. The grin never faltered. The glow from its eyes seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. And then Nit leaned closer. I could feel the cold radiating from its body, an icy wind that cut through me, even though it hadn't touched me yet. My breath clouded in the air between us. Its grin widened even further, splitting skin at the corners of its mouth until faint lines of dark liquid trickled down its chin. When it finally spoke, its voice wasn't sound, it was vibration, echoing inside my skull. "I see you now." My knees buckled. I crashed to the floor, crawling backward in desperation. But no matter how far I moved, it stayed the same distance away, looming, tilting its head as though savoring my terror. In that moment, I understood something terrible. It hadn't been trying to hide all along. It had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself fully. And now, face to face, there was no denying it. I was no longer a tenant in this apartment. I was prey. After seeing it face to face, I knew I couldn't survive another night in the apartment. My hands still shook. My skin crawled with the memory of its hollow eyes and that grotesque grin. I packed a small bag with the essentials: wallet, phone, keys, a change of clothes, determined to leave the moment the sun rose. But the night didn't wait for me. As midnight came, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. The temperature plummeted so suddenly that frost began to creep along the edges of the windows. The lights dimmed, then flickered in rapid bursts, painting the walls in jerky flashes of shadow and light. Then the sounds began. First the knocking, louder than ever. Boom, 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 dot. Then the footsteps, dragging and deliberate, circling the apartment. The sound came from the hallway, then the kitchen, then the living room as though the thing was everywhere at once, pacing, hunting. I pressed myself into the corner of the bedroom, clutching my bag like it could protect me, whispering prayers I hadn't said in years. The chain on the storage room door clattered violently, though it was already broken. I heard whispers seeping through the walls, overlapping voices hissing in a language I couldn't understand, each one dripping with malice. Then everything went still. The silence was worse than the noise. My heart thundered in my chest, my breath ragged, as I waited in the suffocating quiet. And then it appeared. The figure stepped into the doorway of my bedroom. This time, it wasn't distant or half-hidden. It filled the frame completely, hunched and looming, its eyes burning brighter than before. The grin split wider, impossibly wide, tearing skin as black liquid dripped to the floor. It moved closer, each step deliberate, shaking the floor beneath me. I screamed, scrambling backward until my spine pressed against the wall. My phone slipped from my bag and clattered across the floor, its screen lighting up just enough for me to see the reflection of the thing leaning over me. The voice filled the room, booming inside my head, shaking my bones. "You let me out." Its hands, skeletal, freezing reached for me. I thrashed wildly, clawing at the floorboards, my nails tearing until blood smeared the wood. My screams echoed, but no one came. No one ever came. The last thing I remember was its face lowering to mine, those hollow eyes swallowing everything. That grin, stretching until it seemed to split its head in two, and then darkness. When the neighbors spoke of it later, they all agreed on one thing. The apartment was silent the next morning. To silent, don't know footsteps, no movement, no sound of a tenant going about their day, just a heavy stillness that seemed to leak into the hallway outside, pressing on anyone who dared to pass by. A few claimed they smelled something faintly metallic seeping from under the door, like rust or old blood, though no one was brave enough to check. It wasn't until days later, when the rent went unpaid and calls went unanswered, that the landlord finally entered the unit. What he found made him pale. The furniture was still there, the bed neatly made, dishes stacked in the sink. A bag lay on the bedroom floor, half-packed, as though the tenant had been preparing to leave. But there was no sign of the tenant themselves. No struggle, no forced entry, just absent start. The only clue was in the hallway. The storage room door, once chained shut, stood wide open. The darkness beyond seemed endless, devouring the weak light from the corridor. The floorboards nearby were scarred with deep gouges, streaked with something dark that had seeped into the wood. The landlord locked the apartment again, though this time he didn't bother replacing the chain on the storage room. He simply closed the door, muttered something under his breath, and left. Within a week, the unit was listed as vacant once more, but the neighbors noticed things. At night, faint sounds echoed through the walls, knocking, sometimes, whispers, low and insistent. Some swore they heard footsteps pacing the length of the hallway long after midnight, and once someone reported seeing a figure in the window, too tall, too thin, grinning dot. No tenant ever lasted long after that. Most moved out within weeks, citing strange feelings or bad energy. The landlord never pressed them for details. He simply waited for the next desperate soul to sign the lease. And so the cycle continued. If you walk past the building today, the apartment still stands, its blinds drawn, its hallway silent. At midnight, sometimes, the faint sound of knocking echoes from within. 3 knocks, always 3 dot. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear something else. A voice, low and broken, crying out from the dark. Not the thing's voice, but the tenant's, still trapped, still begging to get out.